My dad always said that silence has a sound, the sound of a life wasting away. For 2 years, that was the soundtrack of our house. To him, I was just a ghost in the hallway, a disappointment who stared at a glowing screen while the rest of the world earned their keep. He didn't realize that while he was mourning the daughter he thought I should be, I was building an empire he couldn't even define. He thought I was unemployed. He thought I was lost. But today, the silence finally broke. You know that look, the one where a parent doesn't even bother being angry anymore, they just look at you with this cold, hollow pity? That was my father, Robert. He's a boots-on-the-ground kind of guy. 30 years at the same manufacturing plant, a firm handshake, and a belief that if you aren't sweating by noon, you aren't working. To him, my existence was a personal insult to his work ethic. Every morning at 7 a.m., he'd intentionally bang his coffee mug on the kitchen island, a loud, metallic wake-up call for his deadbeat daughter. "Another big day of staring at the walls, Taylor?" he'd ask, his voice dripping with enough sarcasm to drown in. I'd just nod, clutching my laptop like a lifeline, and head back to my room. He thought I was scrolling through social media or playing games. He didn't see the lines of code, the international Zoom calls at 3 a.m., or the venture capital contracts sitting in my encrypted drive. He didn't see the $1.2 million valuation because, in his mind, if it didn't happen in an office building with a punch clock, it wasn't real. The tension in our small Ohio home had been simmering for months, but it reached a boiling point last week. We were sitting at the dinner table while he was eating, and I was checking a critical server alert on my phone. He slammed his fork down. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. "That's it," he hissed. "I'm done watching you rot. Your cousin Sarah just got promoted to senior manager at the bank. She's 24, Taylor. You're 26, and you can't even pay for your own phone bill." I didn't tell him I'd paid the mortgage for the last 3 months through an anonymous portal so he wouldn't feel the sting of his dwindling pension. I didn't tell him that phone bill was actually a dedicated high-speed fiber line I'd installed under a business alias. I just took the hit. I took the shame. I let him believe I was the failure of the family because the timing wasn't right. I needed the deal to close. I needed the leverage. "I'm looking, Dad," I said quietly. It was a lie, but it was the only thing that kept him from kicking me out. "Looking? You've been looking since the pandemic ended," he scoffed. "Next Tuesday is the neighborhood barbecue. Everyone's going to ask what you're doing with your life. For once, Taylor, try not to embarrass me. Just tell them you're doing freelance data entry or something. At least make it sound like you have a pulse." That was the moment. That was the spark. He wanted me to lie to cover his shame, unaware that the embarrassment he was so afraid of was about to become the biggest shock of his life. Tuesday was the deadline. Tuesday was when my company, Bennett Systems, was going public. And Tuesday was the day I decided to stop playing the role of the unemployed daughter. As I sat in my room that night, the blue light of my monitor reflecting in my eyes, I watched the final signatures go through. My bank balance didn't just change, it transformed. But money wasn't the point. Accountability was. My father lived in a world where you had to see it to believe it. He'd spent 2 years treating me like a burden, oblivious to the fact that I was the only thing keeping his world from collapsing. The barbecue was less than 48 hours away. I could hear him downstairs talking on the phone to his brother, bragging about Sarah's promotion while sighing about my situation. He sounded so tired, so defeated. I almost felt bad for what was coming, but then I remembered the way he'd sneered at my laptop. I remembered the way he told me I'd never amount to anything without a real job. I closed my laptop and felt a strange sense of calm. The trap was set not out of malice, but out of a desperate need for the truth to be told. He wanted a real job. I was about to show him exactly what a CEO looks like. But first, I had to survive one more day of being his greatest disappointment. To understand why Tuesday was going to be such a reckoning, you have to understand the 2 years of psychological warfare I lived through. My father, Robert, isn't a villain, not in the traditional sense. He's just a man trapped in 1985. He believes that if you aren't wearing steel-toed boots or a cheap suit from a department store, you're just playing pretend. To him, my bedroom was a cave of laziness, not a high-stakes command center. The weekend before the barbecue was the worst. He had invited his brother, my Uncle Steve, over to help fix a leak in the garage. Steve is exactly like my dad, loud, opinionated, and convinced that computers are for people who are afraid of hard work. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water, trying to stay invisible, when I heard my name mentioned through the screen door. "So, what's the word on Taylor?" Steve asked, the clinking of wrenches punctuating his words. "Still finding herself?" I froze near the sink, the water running over my hand. I shouldn't have listened, but I couldn't move. "Don't even get me started," my dad sighed. I could hear the genuine weight in his voice, the kind of exhaustion you feel when you think you've failed as a parent. "She's got no drive, Steve." I offered to get her a shift at the warehouse, entry-level packing, and she just looked at me like I was speaking Greek. She'd rather sit in that dark room and type away at nothing. I don't know where I went wrong. I raised her to be a fighter, but she's just stagnant. Stagnant hit harder than unemployed. It implied I was rotting from the inside out. I turned off the tap, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run out there with my phone and show them my portfolio. I wanted to explain that the nothing I was typing was actually a proprietary algorithm for logistics management, the irony being that it was designed to make warehouses like the one my dad worked at twice as efficient. But I didn't. In the world of tech and high-level business, you don't reveal your hand until the contract is signed. If I told him then, he would have called it make-believe money. He needed to see the impact. He needed to see the world acknowledge me before he ever would. That Sunday night, I was finalizing the press release for Bennett Systems. My lead developer, a guy named Marcus based in Seattle, pinged me on Slack. "Taylor, the acquisition offer from Omni Global just hit the $200 million mark. If we go public on Tuesday as planned, your personal stake is going to make headlines. Are you ready for the noise?" I stared at the message. 200 million. It felt like a number from a video game. I looked around my room at the peeling wallpaper, the thrift store desk, and the stack of final notice bills I'd secretly intercepted from the mailbox so my dad wouldn't have a heart attack. I was a millionaire on paper, but I was still the girl who had to ask permission to use the laundry machine so I didn't waste the electricity. "I'm ready," I typed back. "Let the noise begin." Monday morning was a blur of adrenaline and anxiety. My dad was already gone for his shift, leaving a sticky note on the fridge. "Mow the lawn today, try to look productive for once. The neighbors are coming over tomorrow at 4 p.m. Clean shirt, no excuses." I spent the morning mowing the lawn under the blistering Ohio sun, sweating, pushing an old manual mower that caught on every rock. I did it because I loved him, and because it was the last day I'd ever have to play this role. As I pushed that mower, my smartwatch was buzzing incessantly with notifications from my legal team. I was literally negotiating a multi-million-dollar merger while wiping grass clippings off my forehead. Around 2 p.m., a black town car pulled up to our curb. The driver, a man in a crisp suit, stepped out and looked at our modest, slightly weathered house with confusion. He looked at his clipboard, then at me, the girl in stained shorts and a faded t-shirt. "I'm looking for the CEO of Bennett Systems, Taylor Bennett?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I leaned on the mower, breathless. "That's me." He blinked, clearly not expecting the titan of logistics to be doing yard work in the suburbs. "I have the final physical copies of the IPO filings for your signature, ma'am, and the keys to the temporary corporate suite in the city." "Just leave the documents on the porch," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "In the car, can you make sure it's here tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. sharp, not in front of the house, just around the corner?" He nodded, left the heavy leather folder on the porch, and drove away. I watched the dust settle. I went to the porch, opened the folder, and saw my name in bold, elegant print. Taylor Bennett, founder and chief executive officer. That evening, when my dad came home, he didn't even notice the folder tucked under my arm. He was too busy complaining about a new software system they were testing at his plant. "Some hotshot company out of California is trying to tell us how to move pallets," he grumbled, throwing his keys on the counter. The supervisors are all scrambled. They say the system is going to revolutionize the industry, probably just another scam to fire honest workers. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. Bennett Systems wasn't a scam. It was designed to save his plant from closing down. It was designed to keep men like him employed for another 20 years. But to him, it was the enemy, and I was the lazy daughter. Maybe the system is actually good, Dad, I suggested softly. He looked at me with pure frustration. What would you know about it, Taylor? You don't have a job, you don't live in the real world. Just make sure you're ready for the barbecue tomorrow, and for God's sake, stay off your phone while people are talking to you. I just nodded. I'll be ready, Dad, I promise. As I went to bed that night, the house was quiet, but my mind was a roar. Tomorrow, the real world and my world were going to collide, and the sound was going to be deafening. Tuesday morning arrived with a heavy, humid heat that seemed to amplify the tension in our house. My father was a whirlwind of nervous energy. To him, this neighborhood barbecue wasn't just a social gathering, it was a performance. It was the one day a year he felt he had to prove our family was keeping up. He had spent the morning scrubbing the grill and rearranging the patio furniture with a level of intensity usually reserved for a military inspection. "Taylor, did you get those extra bags of ice?" he shouted from the backyard. I was in my room, staring at two different screens. On one, the NASDAQ pre-market ticker was showing a surge in interest for Bennett Systems. On the other, my legal counsel was confirming the final wire transfers for the initial investors. My heart was racing at a speed that made my morning coffee feel redundant. "Coming, Dad," I called back, quickly shutting my laptop. I traded my professional world for a pair of jeans and a plain t-shirt. I had to maintain the disguise for just a few more hours. By 3:30 p.m., the guests started trickling in. Our backyard, which usually felt spacious, suddenly felt cramped with the presence of people I'd known my whole life, people who saw me as Robert's daughter who stayed home. There was Mrs. Higgins from next door, who always asked if I'd found a nice secretarial position yet, and my Uncle Steve, who arrived with a crate of beer and a loud laugh that made my head ache. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of charcoal and the sound of small talk. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, serving drinks and clearing plates. I could hear snippets of conversations as I passed. "Yeah, Sarah's doing incredible," I heard Uncle Steve tell a neighbor. "She just bought a condo in the city, high-rise, floor-to-ceiling windows. That girl's a firecracker." "And Taylor?" the neighbor asked, lowering their voice. "Still. You know," Steve whispered back, shaking his head. "Hard to watch, really. Robert's a saint for keeping her under his roof." I felt the familiar sting of resentment, but this time it was tempered by a cold, hard sense of irony. I looked at Steve, a man who was currently 3 months behind on his truck payments, a fact I knew because I had considered buying out his debt as a graduation gift to myself before I realized he'd just wasted the money. The main event, as my dad called it, started around 4:15 p.m. Everyone was gathered around the large picnic table. My dad stood up holding a plastic cup of soda, looking around at his friends and family. He looked proud, but when his eyes landed on me, that pride flickered and died, replaced by a weary sort of disappointment. "I want to thank everyone for coming," he started, his voice booming. "It's been a tough year for a lot of us. The plant's been shaky and things aren't as simple as they used to be, but seeing everyone here, it reminds me of what's important: hard work and family." He paused, glancing at Sarah, who was sitting at the end of the table looking polished and successful. "We're so proud of Sarah. She's showing us all what it looks like to put in the hours and make something of yourself." There was a round of applause. Sarah beamed. My dad then turned his gaze toward me. I could see the struggle in his eyes. He wanted to say something nice, but he didn't have the vocabulary for a daughter he thought was a failure. "And Taylor," he began, his voice dropping an octave. "Well, Taylor's still with us. She's assisting with some digital projects from home. We're hoping she finds her footing soon." The silence that followed was agonizing. It wasn't a supportive silence. It was the kind of silence you give someone at a funeral. Mrs. Higgins patted my arm sympathetically. Someone coughed. "Actually, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet like a blade, "the digital projects are finished." He blinked, clearly annoyed that I was breaking his carefully constructed narrative of the struggling daughter. "Not now, Taylor. We're eating." "I think now is the perfect time," I replied, standing up. I checked my watch. 4:30 p.m. Right on cue, a low, smooth hum began to grow from the street out front. It wasn't the sound of a regular car. It was the sound of precision engineering. My dad frowned. "Who's that?" I wasn't expecting anyone else. He walked toward the side gate, and the rest of the guests followed, driven by that classic suburban curiosity. I stayed where I was for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was it. The bridge was burning, and I was the one who lit the match. As we reached the front yard, the black town car I'd ordered was idling at the curb. But it wasn't alone. Behind it was a sleek, silver European SUV, a vehicle that cost more than my dad's house. Two men in dark suits stood by the cars. One of them held a tablet, and the other held a bouquet of lilies, my favorite. "What is this?" my dad asked, his hand shielding his eyes from the sun. "Is there a delivery? I didn't order anything." The man with the tablet stepped forward, ignoring my father entirely. His eyes scanned the group until they landed on me. He walked past my stunned uncle, past my successful cousin Sarah, and stopped directly in front of me. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice professional and loud enough for everyone to hear. "The board of directors is assembled. The final valuation has been locked in, and the press is waiting for your statement regarding the OmniGlobal merger. We need to move now if we're going to make the evening news cycle." The backyard barbecue went silent. Not the sympathetic silence from before, but a heavy, confused, suffocating silence. My dad looked at the man, then at the car, then at me. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "Taylor," he finally whispered, his voice trembling. "What is he talking about? Who are these people?" I looked him straight in the eyes. "These are my employees, Dad, and that hotshot company you were complaining about at the plant. The one that's revolutionizing the industry." I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "That's my company. I'm the CEO." The neighbor's dog barked in the distance, but otherwise you could have heard a pin drop on the pavement. The lazy daughter was gone. In her place stood the woman who had just saved my father's career without him ever knowing. The air in the front yard felt like it had been sucked out of a vacuum. My father's face went through a terrifying transformation from confusion to disbelief, and finally, to a deep, burning crimson. He looked at the sleek silver SUV, then at the men in suits who were treating me with a level of deference he hadn't shown me in a decade. "CEO?" Uncle Steve broke the silence, his voice cracking. "Taylor, what kind of prank is this? You've been sitting in your room for 2 years. We've all seen you." The man with the tablet, whose name was Harrison, didn't even look at Steve. He kept his focus on me. "Miss Bennett, we have the SEC filings ready for your digital signature on the way to the studio. The market opened at $42 a share. You are officially the majority shareholder of a multi-million-dollar entity. We really must go." I looked at my father. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The bravado, the hard work lectures, the disappointment, it all seemed to evaporate. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The company at the plant, Bennett Systems, that's named after you, not your grandfather?" "I built it from that dark room you hated so much, Dad," I said, my voice steady but cold. "While you were banging coffee mugs to wake me up, I was closing seed rounds with investors in Tokyo. While you were telling the neighbors I was a burden, I was writing the software that ensured your pension wouldn't disappear when the plant inevitably modernized. I didn't tell you because you made it clear that if I wasn't sweating, I wasn't working. You didn't want a daughter, you wanted a laborer." Sarah, my successful cousin, looked like she wanted to disappear into the sidewalk. Her high-rise condo suddenly didn't seem so impressive compared to a woman who was being escorted by a security detail to a televised IPO announcement. "Taylor, I didn't know," my dad stammered, stepping toward me. He reached out a hand, but I didn't take it. "That's the point, Dad. You didn't want to know. You saw a girl with a laptop and decided she was lazy. You never asked what I was typing. You never asked why I stayed up until 4 a.m. You just assumed I was a failure because I didn't fit into your 1980s version of success. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Higgins, let out a small gasp. The reality was sinking in for everyone. The girl they had pitied for years was now the most powerful person on the block. Harrison opened the door of the silver SUV. "The car is ready, ma'am." I turned to the crowd, to the people who had spent 2 years whispering behind my back. "The barbecue was great, Dad. Thanks for the ice, but I have a board meeting to attend." As I stepped toward the car, my dad found his voice again, but this time it was loud and desperate. "Wait, Taylor, you can't just leave like this. We're family. Why didn't you give me a chance to understand?" I stopped with my hand on the door handle. I looked back at the house, the peeling paint, the manual mower I just used, and the man who thought he knew everything. "I gave you 2 years of chances, Dad. Every time you mocked me at dinner, that was a chance. Every time you compared me to Sarah, that was a chance. You weren't waiting for me to succeed, you were waiting for me to admit defeat. I just chose a different ending." I got into the back seat. The door closed with a heavy, expensive thud, cutting off the sounds of the suburbs. Inside, it was silent, smelling of expensive leather and filtered air. Harrison handed me the tablet. "The world is waiting, Taylor," he said softly. As the car pulled away, I looked out the tinted window. I saw my father standing in the middle of the street, clutching a spatula he'd forgotten he was holding. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd been staring at a gold mine and calling it a pile of dirt. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the plant's internal system, the one I'd built. System integration complete. Efficiency increased by 40%, all staff positions secured. I had saved his job today, and he had lost his daughter. The SUV turned the corner, leaving the neighborhood behind. I watched the ticker on the tablet. Bennett Systems, BNNT, plus 12.4%. The numbers kept climbing, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at the screen. I was looking ahead. I had spent 2 years being a ghost. Now I was finally becoming a person. But as the adrenaline started to fade, a hollow ache settled in my chest. I had won. I had proven them all wrong. So why did it feel like I was leaving a crime scene instead of a celebration? "Are you okay, Miss Bennett?" Harrison asked, noticing my silence. "I'm fine," I said, straightening my posture. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." But as we hit the highway, I realized that the hardest part of being unemployed wasn't the lack of money. It was the realization that the person who was supposed to love you unconditionally had a price tag on their respect. And I had just paid it in full. The skyscraper housing the news studio felt like a different planet compared to my father's dusty backyard. As the makeup artists brushed my face and the producers clipped a microphone to my lapel, my mind was still back on that suburban street. I could still see the spatula in my dad's hand. I could still see the look on Uncle Steve's face, a mix of greed and terror. The red light on the camera flickered to life. The interviewer, a sharp-featured woman in a navy suit, smiled with professional warmth. "Tonight, we are sitting down with Taylor Bennett, the visionary behind Bennett Systems, the company that just saw one of the most successful IPOs of the quarter. Taylor, they're calling you the invisible CEO. You've been operating in total secrecy for years. Why the mystery?" I looked into the lens, knowing my father was likely watching this on the small TV in the kitchen, the one I'd bought him 3 Christmases ago. "It wasn't about mystery," I said, my voice resonating with a clarity that surprised even me. "It was about survival. In a world that only values you based on what they can see you doing, sometimes you have to disappear to actually build something real. People think success is a loud process. They think it's about the office, the suit, and the noise. But the most important work I ever did was in a quiet room where nobody believed in me. That silence gave me the room to grow." The interview lasted 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. I spoke about logistics, about the future of labor, and about protecting the American worker through technology. When the cameras finally cut, the studio erupted into applause. My phone was vibrating nonstop. Hundreds of texts. Friends from high school I hadn't talked to in years, former teachers, and inevitably Uncle Steve. "Hey Taylor, always knew you had it in you. Let's grab dinner soon. Your aunt and I are so proud." I deleted the thread without replying. As I walked out of the building, the cool night air of the city hit me. Harrison was waiting by the SUV. "Where to, Miss Bennett? We've booked the penthouse at the Hyatt." I hesitated. I looked at the city lights, then back toward the direction of the suburbs. "Take me home, Harrison, just for an hour." The drive back was quiet. When we pulled onto my street, the barbecue was over. The neighbors had gone home to gossip, the lights in the houses were dim, and the only thing left in our yard was a stray paper plate tumbling across the grass. I walked up the driveway. My dad was sitting on the porch steps, the yellow porch light casting long, tired shadows across his face. He didn't have a beer. He didn't have his phone. He was just staring at the manual mower I'd left in the middle of the yard. I sat down on the step below him. We didn't speak for a long time. "I watched the news," he said finally. His voice was cracked, stripped of all the authority he usually carried. You looked like a stranger, Taylor." I didn't recognize my own daughter in that chair. "That's because you never looked at me when I was sitting in my room, Dad," I said softly. "You only looked at the door I was behind." He put his head in his hands. "I thought I was helping. I thought if I pushed you, if I made you feel uncomfortable, you'd go out and get a proper life. I didn't want you to end up like me, breaking your back for 30 years just to stay afloat. I thought you were giving up. I didn't know you were winning." "You didn't trust the person you raised," I replied. "That's what hurts. It wasn't about the money or the job. It was the fact that even when I told you I was working, you chose to believe I was a liar because I wasn't doing it your way." He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw a tear roll down his weathered cheek. "I'm sorry, Taylor. I've been a fool, a proud, stubborn fool. I've spent 2 years mourning a daughter who was actually outgrowing me." I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, unassuming envelope. I placed it on the step between us. "What's this?" he asked. "It's the deed to the house, Dad, and a retirement package from Bennett Systems. You're officially retired, effective tomorrow. You don't have to go back to that plant. You don't have to worry about the modernization or the shifts or the supervisors. It's done." He stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. "I can't take this, not after how I treated you." "Take it," I said, standing up. "I didn't do it for the dad who mocked me. I did it for the dad who used to carry me on his shoulders and told me I could be anything. That man is still in there somewhere. I hope you find him now that you don't have to work so hard." I started walking back toward the SUV. "Are you coming inside?" he called out, his voice desperate. I stopped and looked back at the house. The windows were dark and the rooms felt small. I realized that while I had saved the house, I could no longer live in it. I had built a world that was too big for these walls. "Not tonight, Dad. I have a lot of work to do." I got into the car, and this time I didn't look back through the tinted window. The story of the unemployed daughter was over. The world saw a CEO, a millionaire, and a success story. But as the car sped toward the city, I knew the truth. Revenge isn't about hurting people. It isn't about making them suffer. True revenge, the kind that stays with you, is simply becoming the person they said you could never be and then realizing you don't need their permission to exist anymore. My dad thought I was unemployed until today. Now he knows exactly who I am, and the irony is I've never felt more like a stranger. I opened my laptop, the familiar blue glow illuminating the dark cabin of the car. There was a new email in my inbox, a new challenge, a new empire to build. I took a deep breath, deleted the final notice from the electric company that was still on my screen, and started to type. The silence was gone. The noise had started, and I was ready for every bit of it.